Fellow mathematicians, I have some really bad news. The Smarts Mill calculators have decided to take a small vacation. They're going to be out for about a week. They said that they were tired of being in the dark, dank all summer long and they needed some sunlight. So they are taking a Disney cruise. In lieu of all of this, we still have to learn how to convert fractions, decimals, and percents. So this video lesson will be on how to convert fractions, decimals, and percents. Okay? You have a notes page, and what I want you to do is as I go through the notes here on the whiteboard, I want you to just write down the examples on your notes page. Okay? Sometimes I'll mention something about a VIC, which is a very important concept, and you may want to write that down as well if you can't quite remember it. Okay? All right, so here we go. Fractions, decimals, and percentes. So we're going to start with, if you have a fraction, how to turn that to a decimal and to a percent. Okay? So let's say you have a fraction like 3/20. So your numerator is 3 and your denominator is 20. Okay? Now to do this without a calculator, we still have to divide the numerator by the denominator, which means that the numerator is going to go on the inside of the division bracket when we do long division. Okay? So I put my 3 on the inside and I put my 20 on the outside. Okay? Now 20 does not go into 3. Uh-oh, spaghetti-o, we got a problem, right? Nope, we don't. Okay, we just put a 0 there and we add a decimal and we add a 0. Now you're looking at 20 goes into 30. How many times? Whoa, Mrs. Ferrell, it goes in 1 time. 1 times 20 is 20. Okay, we subtract that and we get a remainder of 10. Okay. Now, as long as you get a remainder, you should keep adding zeros and keep going until you have at least 3 numbers after the decimal. That's the protocol, okay? Very important concept there. 3 numbers after the decimal, or no remainder. Okay, so we're going to keep going because we have this 10 as a remainder. So we add 1 more 0, and now we're looking at how many times does 20 go into 100? It goes in 5 times, okay? 5 times 20 is 100, and we have no remainder. Remember that very important concept? 3 numbers after the decimal, or no remainder. No remainder. So we're finished. We have turned 3/20 into a decimal, and it is now 1500ths. Okay? There is a simpler way to do this for some fractions. It doesn't work for every fraction, unfortunately, but it helps with this one and some of its other fraction friends. Okay? So if I take 3/20 and I try to change the denominator, which is the bottom, to any power of 10, I can easily make it into a decimal. Okay? So your powers of 10 are like 10, 100, 1000, things like that. Okay? This one I can do that with because 20 times 5 makes my bottom, my denominator, 100. But whatever I do to the bottom of a fraction, I have to do to the top. So I also times 3 times 5, and I get 15. And when I say that as a fraction, it is 1500ths. Okay? So I write it as a decimal as 1500ths, 0.15. Okay? Now let's say that a problem asks you to go from a fraction to a percent. There's actually a couple ways to do that as well. Okay? The first way is to turn it into a decimal and then move it 2 times to the right. 2 times to the right, to the right. Okay? So I have 0.15 as my decimal. I move it once, twice, I end up with 15%. Okay? Or you can make it a fraction out of 100 because percent is always out of exactly 100. So that means your denominator for a percent is always going to be 100. So if you can change that denominator to 100, you have 15 out of 100, and your numerator, which is your top number, becomes your percent, 15%. If you have a decimal and you want to change it to a fraction or a percent, okay? So if we have the decimal 24 hundredths, and this is how I know how that reads. Anything before the decimal is going to be the ones, the tens, so on and so on. Okay? But when you have stuff after the decimal, it goes tenths, hundredths, the next one would be thousandths. Okay? So this one is 24 hundredths because that's where my decimal ends. That's where the last place is. Okay? So as a fraction, I would say 24 hundredths. Well, that tells me that my numerator is 24 and my denominator is 100. The only thing is, we don't like big fractions like that if we can simplify them. Okay? So to simplify a fraction, you have to decide what's something that the numerator and the denominator can both be divided by. In this case, it was 4. So 24 divided by 4 is 6. 100 divided by 4 is 25. So the simplified fraction is 6/25. If you want to make a decimal into a percent, you just move it 2 times. To the right, right? Okay? So I just take 0.24 once, twice, to the right, and I get 24%. Okay? Now let's say you have a percent, like 32%, and you want to change it to a decimal or you want a fraction. How do we do that? Okay, so I have 32% and I want to change it to a decimal. Okay, remember how I keep saying move the decimal 2 times? Okay, this time instead of 2 times to the right, it's going to be 2 times to the left, Okay, remember that Beyonce song? Okay, so I take my decimal and I move it once, twice to the left, and I end up with 0.32 or 32 hundredths. Okay? So as a fraction, I changed it to a decimal first, and I said, okay, that's 32 hundredths. 32 over 100. Or, even simpler, percent is always out of... Very good. You are right yet again. 100. So I could just take that percent and put it over 100. Now, what's wrong with this fraction? It needs to be simplified, okay? So we're going to find something to divide both the top and the bottom by. In this case, it was 4. 32 divided by 4 is 8. 100 divided by 4 is 25. So your final simplified fraction that's equivalent to 32% is 8/25. Okay? All right, you have one more spot on your sheet that you need to fill out to complete and say, check, got the homework, okay? So you need to make sure you fill out that last question completely. If you need to rewind the video, pause, anything like that so that you can see the examples and write them down to fill out the notes page, that is totes cool. Hello, I'm Dr. Avale, and today I'm explaining fractions, decimals, and percents.